better? That's the question, right? So let's dive into that tonight with Jeanne Allen, the founder and CEO for the Center for Education Reform. She also worked for the U.S. Department of Education, by the way, during the Reagan administration. Thank you for being here, Jeanne. So when it comes to our education, the question is it a good thing or is it a bad thing to get rid of this department?
It's a really good thing, Chris, to close down a department that has actually grown by leaps and bounds with bureaucracy and ineffective programs and not done the kinds of work that you just outlined in those programs is actually supposed to happen.
You know, I don't think most people realize the Department of Education has been around for less than 50 years. And I bring that up because millions of Americans went to school, graduated, joined the workforce, all before that agency even existed. And how did they turn out? And be careful, because now you're talking about my parents. You're talking about many of our bosses, some of our state, local, even federal leaders. How did they make it through without the Department of Education?
Yeah, so great question. The federal government really came into existence in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, a little history lesson there, as kind of a political reward for support from the teachers' unions. True story. Was there a sense that it was needed back then? Not really. It was an agency within another agency, the one that's now HHS. And so they thought, well, by elevating this, we're telling the nation's educators and teachers and others that we care about you. Except for it doesn't work that way. Because if you care about teachers and schools and what's happening, you want people closest to the kids to have the authority. And so if the federal government, and you vote for a president that wants to give more money to schools, wants to do that, then there should be a decision made closest to kids how to actually spend that money. And that's not what happened.
So there wasn't a singular event or low test scores that led to the formation?
No, not at all. In fact, after the department was created, and you might recall, Reagan ran on abolishing it right away. And there was the Nation at Risk report 3 years later, which condemned American public education. It was the first time we had a national bird's eye view into what was happening in schools. And the famous quote is that we found that the programs are a mile wide and inch deep. And if a foreign power had done to us what U.S. education was doing to our kids, we would have declared an act of war.
Interesting. Very interesting. You know, people are worried, though, Jeanne, and you can understand that because it's become the norm, right? And maybe things like Pell Grants, which provide, as you know, money for college students who come from low-income families. Will those dollars still be available if the department goes away?
Yes, the dollars will still be available. Those are still programs that are legislated into existence, that are funded every year through the appropriations process in Congress. Like all of these things that happen in D.C. right outside my back door are things that happen after lots of deliberation, lots of people weigh in. And so they would go other places, right? Student loans and higher ed might go to Treasury. You might take all those programs of special needs and go to the Health and Human Services Department. It's not about necessarily cutting funding, although they will cut funding to unnecessary programs that undermine the work that's happening at the local level. There will be millions, potentially billions slashed. There already have been some. But the programs that are working for students best, it's a commitment of theirs to stay and keep those where they are.
Real quick, are there more or are there better safeguards at the state level compared to the federal government?
Well, here's what happens at the state level, yes. And it's not that every state education department, which is also large, are also very bureaucratic, and parents and citizens have to be aware of that. It's not that all of them, no matter who's governor, is great. It's that there is more transparency with state legislators, with local people who activate and see on the ground what's happening. Right. It's why we have laws at the local level to open up options to kids, to change the way we teach special needs kids. More can happen at the local and the state level than can happen at the federal level. It's just a fact.
I get it. Hey, stick around for a second because Arlani Coombs is going to continue this conversation in just a minute. But first, I want our viewers to keep in mind the department won't just vanish with the stroke of Trump's pen. A 60-vote majority from Congress is required to dismantle any government agency. And if you're wondering if any Democrats will actually cross the aisle to work with Trump on this, Here's your answer. Listen to this.
If the federal government ceases to fund the educational needs of working class communities, that will mean higher local and state taxes to fill the void. In other words, shutting down the Department of Education would be a disaster for low-income and working class families in every state of our country.
If the Republicans want to work together with us on real education reform, we'll be the first in line to do it. If there's things that are wasteful, show us what they are.
So I bet you're wondering, is this even a possibility? It is, because even without congressional approval, the Department of Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, could potentially lay off enough employees to keep the agency from actually functioning. Very interesting conversation, right, Lonnie?
Yeah.